My son smiled too wide when he said, "Taste the gravy, Mama." That's when I knew. Not because of anything he said out loud, just something behind his eyes. Too bright. Too eager. The way his hand hovered near my plate like he was waiting on a timer to go off. Darnell never cared about Sunday dinner before. Most years he barely looked up from his phone long enough to say grace. But this time he leaned over all sweet and slow, like molasses in January, and said, "Made it special for you, Mama. Just the way you like it. Promise." I didn't answer him. I just looked at that gravy, rich and dark, pooling thick over the slice of roast on my plate. Then I looked at Monique. She was laughing too loud at something one of the younger cousins had said, her plate sitting untouched right next to mine. I don't know what moved me to do what I did next. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was 20 years of watching those two whisper in corners when they thought I couldn't hear. The way they'd cut eyes at each other every time I mentioned my will, my house, or Lord have mercy, my health. I just reached over and switched our plates. Quiet as a prayer. Monique didn't notice. Nobody noticed except Darnell. He went stiff for just a second, barely, but I caught it. That practiced smile slipped just a fraction, and he said, "Wait now, Mama. Hold on. That one's yours." But I'd already taken a bite of her macaroni. Nodded like everything was fine. Like I was just an old woman enjoying Sunday dinner. 10 minutes later, Monique said her stomach hurt. 20 minutes after that, she was pale and bent over, clutching herself. At 30 minutes, we called 911. The rest of that evening unraveled like thread pulled from a worn hem. The grandchildren were crying, Darnell was pacing the length of the room, and I sat perfectly still at the long dining table my Earl built with his own 2 hands, sipping cold sweet tea while the ambulance lights painted the dark street outside in flashes of red and blue. Nobody asked how I felt. Nobody even remembered it was my plate she'd eaten from. The paramedics said it looked like an allergic reaction, something sudden and serious. Monique could barely speak, her face swollen and slick with sweat, but I heard her whisper, "It was the gravy." I looked at Darnell. He looked at me. Neither one of us blinked. I hadn't had a reaction. Not a cramp. Not a flutter in my throat. And I had more allergies than I could count on both hands. Shellfish, tree nuts, certain preservatives, even some kinds of mushrooms. At my age, you learn to read every label like it's scripture and smell before you swallow. It's just survival. Monique didn't have allergies. Not that I'd ever known. But she had eaten something that made her body cry out. And if that something was in the gravy, my special serving, then what exactly had my son intended? After the ambulance left, I stayed. Everyone else followed to the hospital or slipped away with excuses and awkward hugs. I stayed and cleaned up. Folded the napkins, rinsed the plates, wrapped the leftovers in foil the way my mother taught me. Nobody offered to help. They never did. The gravy boat was almost empty. I poured what was left into a mason jar, sealed it tight, and tucked it behind the sweet potato pie in the back of the refrigerator. Then I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, listening to the house breathe around me. Something inside me had shifted. Not fear. I wasn't afraid. But it felt like the moment before a summer storm when the air gets that heavy stillness and you know the sky is about to open up and mean it. I had been blind for too long. I'd let them smile at me with teeth like razors. Told me how grateful they were, how blessed they were to have me, while maneuvering around me like I was just an old piece of furniture they hadn't figured out how to get rid of yet. But tonight I had seen it clear as the light through a clean window. And for the first time in years, I wasn't going to let it pass. I didn't sleep that night. Not from worry over Monique, though I did wonder how she was holding up, but because my mind wouldn't stop running back through the evening, frame by frame, like rewinding an old VHS tape, searching for the exact moment the lie had started. The kitchen still smelled faintly of roast and sweet potato. I'd left one lamp on, the old amber one above the sink that Earl had installed the summer before he passed, and I sat beneath it with a notebook open in front of me. Not to write anything down, just to keep my hands from shaking. At 2:23 in the morning, my phone lit up on the table. A text from Darnell. Still at ER. She's stable. I'll keep you posted. No, thank you for staying. No, how are you feeling, Mama? No, I love you. Just a notification, like I was some name on a clipboard. I didn't reply. At 3:07, I got up and took the mason jar out of the refrigerator. I held it up to the lamplight. Looked fine. Smelled fine. But something wasn't right. I poured a little onto a saucer and stirred it slow with a spoon. There were flecks in it. Not pepper. Not thyme. I picked one out carefully with a toothpick and held it to the light. Too small to name for certain. But I wasn't imagining things. I rinsed the jar, dried it, and made a note to call my doctor in the morning. Not because I felt sick. I felt fine. But I wanted a record. I needed something on paper. The next day I didn't hear from Darnell at all. Around noon, my granddaughter Jade called. 17 years old, soft voice, her grandmother's steady eyes in her mother's face. "Grandma," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." I sat down slow. "Go on, baby." "I don't know if I should. It might be nothing. But yesterday before dinner, I saw Daddy in the kitchen with the gravy. He was adding something from a little glass bottle. Like a dropper. I thought it was just seasoning or something, but my throat tightened. "Are you sure?" A pause on the line. He looked nervous. When I walked in, he jumped. Then he told me to go help set the table. "Did your mother see?" "I don't think so. She was upstairs with Aunt Denise." I thanked her. Told her she did right by calling me. Told her to keep quiet about it for now. After I hung up, I sat staring at the wall for a long time. Then I stood up, walked to my filing cabinet, and pulled out the envelope Darnell had handed me back in the spring. "It's just a power of attorney for some hospital paperwork, Mama," he'd said, sliding it across the table with the same easy smile he used in high school when he was hiding a bad report card. "Nothing major. Just a precaution, you know, in case of emergencies." I hadn't read it carefully. I trusted him. I had raised that boy. Bathed him and fed him and taught him how to lace his shoes and look a person in the eye and know the difference between right and wrong. But standing there in my kitchen, I suddenly remembered the way he'd pushed me to sign quickly. The second envelope I hadn't asked about. The way Monique had said, "Good, now that's done," before she even glanced at the papers. I opened the envelope now, hands steady as a Sunday morning, and read the first page. Then the second. It wasn't just a medical document. It was a durable power of attorney, signed and notarized, giving Darnell full legal control over my finances if I were ever deemed mentally unfit. My stomach dropped. I turned to the last page. My own signature, shaky and slanted, looked back at me like a stranger. I hadn't understood what I'd put my name to. And if that gravy had made me sick, if I'd ended up in that hospital confused and vomiting and disoriented, well, what then? Would they have called me unfit? Would Darnell have stepped in and taken everything? I felt something settle inside me, cold and certain. Not panic. Not grief. Resolution. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. "Victor," I said, keeping my voice even as river water. "I need you to look at a document for me. And I need to change my power of attorney today." A pause, then his calm, steady voice. "Of course, Mrs. Odessa. Can you come in this afternoon?" I looked at the clock. "I'll be there in an hour." And I was. Because some storms don't wait for you to get ready. Some you have to walk straight into with your head up and your name intact. Victor James had handled my family's legal matters since Earl first drafted a will back in 1987. Sharp as a tack, soft-spoken, always in a dark suit that looked like it cost more than my first car. When I walked into his office downtown that afternoon, he was already waiting in the hall. "I saw your name on the call log," he said gently, leading me inside. "Bring the document." I handed him the envelope. He read it slow, adjusted his glasses once, then held up the final page like he was reading a verdict. Mrs. Odessa, did you understand what you were signing here? No, I said. I trusted my son. He nodded, and something moved across his face. Sorrow, maybe. Or anger held tight behind professionalism. This is a general durable power of attorney. Not just for health matters. It gives Darnell full authority over your finances, your property, even decisions about where you live, should you ever be deemed mentally incapable. I didn't flinch. I'd already gone cold inside long before I walked through his door. Do you feel mentally incapable? He asked carefully. Victor, I said. I drove myself here. I did the crossword this morning. I balanced my checkbook last Tuesday. And I've been fighting a case of hyacinths taking over my garden that would humble a horticulturalist. That made him smile. Just briefly. You seem perfectly fine to me, he said. Would you like to revoke this? I would. And I want to draw up a new one naming my granddaughter Jade as sole designee. Victor blinked. Not Darnell. Not Darnell. He nodded, more firmly this time. We'll also want to draft a living will. And I'd recommend an irrevocable trust if you're ready to talk about protecting your estate. I was ready. More than ready. We spent the next hour going through every word. He read each line aloud, and then I read them again myself. He didn't rush me once. When I signed, my hand didn't tremble. By the time I stepped back out onto the sidewalk, the afternoon had gone golden and cool. My shoulders felt lighter than they had in years. Back home, I put on the radio low, the way Earl used to like it, and sat at the kitchen table with my household ledger. For decades I had tracked every dollar, not out of worry but out of discipline. I believe in accountability. I flipped through the last year. $1,500 here for Darnell's car repair. $800 there for Monique's dental emergency. $600 for Jade's school field trip, the only one I didn't resent a penny of. And then the one that stopped me cold. $11,000 last winter for plumbing repairs on the rental property Darnell never actually fixed. It was all there. In my neat handwriting. Every time I'd said yes when I should have said enough. I closed the ledger. Not anymore. At 5:17 that evening, my phone rang. Darnell. I watched his name on the screen until it stopped. No voicemail. 5 minutes later, a text. Mama, we need to talk. You free tonight? I didn't reply. At 7:43, Jade called. Grandma, she said, voice low. I just want you to know, they've been saying things. That you're confused. That you're forgetting things. I felt my pulse slow down to something steady and deliberate. They say it when you're not around, she continued. They've been saying you should think about a care facility. I closed my eyes for just a moment. Thank you for telling me, baby. A long silence on the line. Then her voice cracked open like a split seam. I don't think you're confused. I think you're the only one who sees what's really happening. I see it clearly now, I said. Do you want me to come over? No, darling. You just keep your ears open. Don't let them frighten you. We said our goodbyes and I turned off the kitchen light. In the dark, I stood at the window and watched the streetlights blink on one by one down the block, the way they always had, the way they would long after all of this was settled. They thought they were clever. Thought they could ease me quietly into silence. Into a care home and a controlled account and a legal document that made them the ones in charge. They had forgotten who I was. I raised a family. I buried a husband. I built a life from the ground up with calloused hands and a clear mind. And no one, no matter how sweetly they smiled, was going to write me out of my own story. I woke early the next morning. Not from worry, but from something older than worry. At 72, your body stops waiting for alarm clocks. Your bones do the waking. The house was quiet in that particular way that reminds you no one's coming down the stairs for breakfast anymore. No wet towels left on the bathroom floor. No back door slamming. Just me, The tick of the wall clock Earl had hung crooked and I'd never straightened, and the old percolator sputtering to life on the counter. I poured my coffee, sat at the table, and pulled out the small red notebook from the kitchen drawer. The one I hadn't opened in over a decade. Inside were records, letters, notes, receipts I'd tucked away without quite knowing why. I used to call it my rainy day file. I suppose somewhere deep down I always knew a storm was coming. There was a sticky note from 3 years back. Mama, can you sign this quick? Forgot to file the city permit for the rental and they'll fine us if it's late. I'd signed. Of course I had. Who wouldn't help their own child? I kept digging. Found another paper folded in thirds, a scanned document he'd emailed marked urgent. At the bottom, barely legible, a line authorizing temporary access to my investment account. Just for some short-term restructuring, he'd said. I hadn't remembered this one at all. Then a Christmas card from Monique, 2 years back, with a second envelope tucked inside. A thank you note, supposedly. But inside was a printed list titled Joint Expenses to Reimburse, Darnell approved by Mama. At the bottom, a signature line. My signature was there. Slanted and rushed, like I'd signed it standing up without my glasses. I stared at it for a long time. Set it aside. If there was going to be a storm, I needed to start gathering the thunder. By 10 o'clock I was in my car. A reliable 2009 Buick, silver and sensible. I didn't need flash. I needed dependability. First stop, the bank. The young woman at the counter, cheerful and new, called me ma'am with that trained sweetness I could smell before she opened her mouth. When I asked to speak with someone about recent account activity, she handed me off to the branch manager without blinking. Mr. Tatum was maybe 45, maybe younger. He wore a tie with a geometric pattern and a smile that had been practiced in mirrors. But when I told him what I needed, a full review of the last 12 months of transactions and any active authorizations on file, the smile went a little uncertain. Of course, Mrs. Odessa. Let me pull up your account. He typed, clicked, squinted at the screen. His eyes moved left to right. Then stopped. There are a few active links here. One joint authorization on an automatic transfer to an external account in the name of D. Reynolds and M. Reynolds. How much? It's been running monthly. $1,500 on the 5th. Categorized as maintenance support. Stop it, I said. He blinked. Excuse me. Cancel that transfer immediately. And I want written confirmation. He nodded slowly. Of course. Just to clarify, this was authorized under the power of attorney signed in March. That document is no longer valid, I said. I revoked it yesterday. My attorney will send you the updated paperwork today. He cleared his throat. Understood. I leaned forward just slightly. I'd also like to restrict all future changes to this account to in-person verification only. No phone amendments. No online changes. Yes, ma'am. Before I left, I asked him to print the last 12 months of statements. I tucked them into my bag and walked out into the weak winter sun, not triumphant, but clear. Like a woman who'd finally found her glasses after months of squinting at a world gone soft and blurry. Back home I spread the statements across the kitchen table and read them line by line. Dry cleaning charges I hadn't made. Electronics orders I'd never placed. A $280 payment to a photography studio I'd never heard of. And near the bottom of one page, flagged in faint red, emergency withdrawal, $2,500. I had never made that withdrawal. But Darnell had access then. I looked out at the bare oak tree in the backyard, its branches reaching up like open hands asking a question nobody wanted to answer. And I made another decision. I was not going to be the kind of woman who forgave without accountability. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft dressed up in family clothing. And I was going to treat it exactly as such. Spring had come early that year. The azaleas in my front yard were blooming a full 2 weeks ahead of schedule, fat and pink and unbothered. It was the same week Darnell had stopped by unannounced, holding a coffee cup and a manila folder, looking like a man who'd just come from a meeting he was proud of. "Mama," he said, all easy smiles. "You look good. Been gardening?" I remember wiping my hands on my work pants and looking up at him steady. "You're 2 years late with compliments, Darnell. What do you want?" He laughed like I'd said something charming. Can't a man visit his own mother without a reason? But he followed me inside like someone with an agenda. "I do need a small favor," he said once we were seated. "Nothing complicated. Just need your signature on a couple of things." He laid a folder open on the table. "This one's for the city," he explained, tapping the top page. "Permits for the rental property. Since it's in your name, they need your approval. You know how bureaucracy is." I looked at the page. My name typed neatly across the top. The city seal watermarked in the middle. It looked official enough. "And this one?" He slid a second form toward me. "Just a medical release," he said, a little too quickly. "In case anything ever happens to you, God forbid. Hospitals like to have everything on file in advance." "I already have a living will, Darnell." "Yeah, but this one's more current. More comprehensive. Victor helped me draw it up, actually." "You trust Victor, don't you?" That's when I slowed down. I did trust Victor. But I didn't trust the particular tone in Darnell's voice. Too smooth. Too prepared. He'd always been a talker. Got it from his father. God rest Earl's soul. But this was something else. This was rehearsed. I remember picking up the pen. Then setting it back down. "Let me read through this carefully," I said. Something flickered across Darnell's jaw. Just a twitch. Gone in half a second. "Of course," he said, pushing the folder an inch closer. "Take all the time you need. I'll freshen up your coffee." I nodded. But I didn't read it the way I should have. I skimmed the first few lines, saw the words durable power of attorney, and told myself it just meant he could speak for me if I was ever unconscious in a hospital somewhere. So I signed. He left with both folders tucked neat under his arm, looking like a man who'd just won something he'd been playing toward for a long time. Now, sitting at my kitchen table months later with bank statements fanned out around me like fallen leaves, I saw that moment for what it truly was. Not love. Not concern. Strategy. I picked up the phone and called Victor again. "I want to schedule another meeting," I said. "Full asset protection. The kind Darnell can't reach. Not now, not ever." Victor didn't ask why. He just said, "Tomorrow morning, first thing." "Yes," I said. "First thing." After I hung up, I stood at the sink looking out at the oak tree swaying in the November wind. Darnell had always been my miracle. Born after 2 losses and a long string of doctors shaking their heads. I'd nursed him through colic, through chickenpox, through his first heartbreak when a girl named Tanisha left him in his second year of college. I'd paid off his student loans when the market crashed. Lent him the down payment on their first house. Covered their property taxes twice over. Done it all willingly, without keeping score. But none of it bought loyalty. None of it bought basic human decency. And now that he looked at me not as his mother but as an obstacle, I owed it to myself to become something he could not move around. Tomorrow I would start building that wall, brick by careful brick. Victor had cleared his morning. When I arrived at 9, he had fresh coffee waiting and a yellow legal pad already open on his desk. "You brought more than I expected," he said, looking at the documents I set before him. "I brought a pattern," I told him. "One that's been building for years. I just didn't want to look at it directly until now." We went through everything page by page. The bank statements, the misleading forms, the Christmas card with Monique's reimbursement list tucked inside. By the time we reached the bottom of the pile, Victor had taken off his glasses. "Mrs. Odessa, this goes beyond carelessness. This is exploitation." I nodded. I didn't need him to name it. I needed him to help me end it. "We can revoke everything already in motion," which you've done. That's the first step. But I'd recommend going further. How much further? Irrevocable trust. We transfer your assets into it. Your accounts, your property, anything you want protected. You appoint a trustee, someone you trust completely, and that person manages everything according to your wishes. Darnell cannot touch it. Not today. Not 10 years from now. And if something happens to me? Your wishes stay in place permanently, no matter what anyone tries to claim about your mental state. I exhaled slowly. Who can serve as trustee? A professional, or someone in your family, depending on your comfort. I didn't hesitate even a breath. Jade. Victor looked at me over the top of his glasses. Your granddaughter? She's 17. She's the only one who's told me the truth. Age is a number. Character is something else. Legally, we'll need a co-trustee until she turns 18. I can recommend someone neutral. Do it, I said. Start the paperwork now. While he typed, I glanced around his office. Same mahogany desk. Same window looking out over the courthouse square. Same framed photo of his old dog in the corner. I'd sat in this same chair when Earl and I made our first will together. When we named guardians for Darnell in case we died young. When I signed the final papers after Earl's heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in October. But this time felt different. This time I wasn't preserving something. I was reclaiming it. When we finished, Victor printed the preliminary forms. I signed every one, slowly and deliberately. No rushing. No distraction. Just ink and intention. As I gathered my coat to leave, he stood. You're doing the right thing, he said gently. But brace yourself. When people like your son realize what they thought was guaranteed has been removed, they don't respond quietly. I'm not worried about their feelings, I said. I'm worried about mine. And I'm tired of being the only one who is. Before I walked out, I handed him one final envelope. Open this after I'm gone, I said. It's my updated will. I want it finalized. And add one clause. If any beneficiary attempts to contest the trust or challenge my mental fitness, they are disinherited automatically. Victor raised an eyebrow. That's a serious provision. That's clarity, I said. He nodded, slipped the envelope into his desk drawer, and walked me to the door. Back home, the phone was already ringing before I had my coat off. Darnell. Then Monique. Then Darnell again. I watched their names light up the screen like small warnings. Eventually, a voicemail. Mama, something's going on with the bank. They're saying I'm not authorized anymore. Call me. Are you okay? I sat down with my tea. Opened the curtains. Let the pale November light come all the way in. It was soft and grey and honest. I could breathe inside it. That afternoon Jade texted. Just checking on you, Grandma. Everything okay? I wrote back. Better than okay. Building fences they can't climb. She didn't ask what I meant. She just replied. I'm proud of you. I stared at those 4 words for a long time. Then I smiled. A real smile, the kind that starts somewhere behind your eyes and works its way out slow. The call I'd been waiting for came just after 6 while I was folding laundry and listening to an old Aretha record. Darnell's name lit up the phone. I let it ring. Then again. On the 4th try I answered. Hi, Darnell. His voice came fast and clipped. Why are there blocks on the accounts? Why is the bank saying I'm not authorized? Because you're not, I said. What is going on, Mama? I didn't answer right away. I walked to the kitchen, set the phone on speaker, and filled the kettle. Did you revoke the power of attorney? Yes. A long silence. You didn't even discuss it with me. I didn't need to. You're not thinking straight. I smiled faintly. I think more clearly now than I have in years. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being awake. He sighed loud. Look, I get it. You're upset about Sunday dinner. But this is an overreaction. I was trying to make sure your affairs were in order. I'm your son. You tried to take ownership of my life, I said, even and quiet. That's not love. That's control. Mama, don't be irrational. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Pity. He still thought he could talk his way back into the center of things. I've spoken with Victor, I said. Everything is in a trust now. Your name is not on any account. My decisions are final. His voice rose. What about the house? What about inheritance? I laughed softly. There it is. Silence. I've made arrangements for Jade, I continued. She knows nothing about the details because there's nothing left to discuss. I'm not dead yet, Darnell. I intend to enjoy what I have. His voice went tight. This is not fair. No, I said. What wasn't fair was adding something to my food and hoping I'd end up in a hospital bed confused enough to sign whatever you put in front of me. That is insane. You think I tried to poison you. I think you added something to that gravy, I said calmly. Jade saw you. And I know what I signed last spring. He went quiet. That silence was not the silence of innocence. You should be careful, Darnell, I added. Because now if anything happens to me, the people who need to know will know exactly where to look. You wouldn't do that. I already did. Another silence. Then quietly. Is this how you want things to end between us? I want things to begin again, I said. Without fear. Without manipulation. Without this. A pause. I have Jade, I said. That is more than enough. He hung up. The kettle began to whistle. I took it off the burner and poured the water slow over a bag of chamomile tea. My hands were perfectly steady. I didn't feel empty this time. I felt clean. The way you feel after you've finally thrown out something rotten you should have let go of years ago. Jade came over that weekend with her sketchbook, 2 biscuits wrapped in foil, and the quietest smile I'd seen on her face in months. They're not talking to me, she said, settling at the table. Mom says I betrayed the family. You told the truth, I said. That's what I told her. We sat the way we used to, her drawing while I made tea, the radio humming low between us. After a while she held up her sketchbook. On the page was an old woman's face, half wrapped in the branches of a flowering tree. Is that me? She nodded. But it's not a cage, she said. It's a tree. You're still growing. I touched the edge of the page gently. When she left, she hugged me the way you hug someone you almost lost. You saved yourself, Grandma, she whispered. I just watched. No, I said. You reminded me I was still worth saving. That night I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not as a chore. As a ritual. I opened closets I hadn't touched in years, cleared out what no longer felt like mine, found a box of Earl's things and sat with them a while, his old watch, his church program from the last Sunday he attended, a note in his handwriting I'd forgotten existed. Then I wrote a new will. Clean lines. Clear intentions. 1 page. The house to Jade. A donation to the women's shelter where I used to volunteer every 3rd Saturday. Everything else hers to do with as she saw fit. In the morning I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. Not younger. Not softer. But present. Fully, undeniably present. I no longer saw the woman they had tried to make me. Forgetful. Burdensome. Fading quietly toward irrelevance. I saw the woman who had raised a son, buried a husband, survived betrayal, and still stood steady in her own kitchen on a cold November morning. That woman was not to be pitied. She was to be remembered. Before breakfast, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky was wide and washed clean. The early winter light had that sharp particular quality that makes everything look newly made. I held my tea in both hands and watched the street, still and quiet and mine. And then, slowly, I smiled. They wouldn't come back. And I didn't want them to. Because the life I had now, quiet as it was, finally belonged entirely to me. For the first time in longer than I could name, I didn't feel old. I felt real. I felt free.